Hi everybody, I hope you're all doing really well. Back today to talk about Think Again by Jacqueline Wilson. Now, if you were a young girl growing up around the 1990s, early 2000s, chances are that you have read your fair share of Jacqueline Wilson. She is an incredibly prolific children's novelist here in the UK, but she also, in her time, has written things intended for a more teenage crowd. Her most popular being her Girls series. There are 4 books in this series. Firstly, Girls in Love, Girls Under Pressure, Girls Out Late, and Girls in Tears, all centred around the trio of Ellie, Magda and Nadine, though we are following Ellie's perspective. Ellie, our protagonist, is shy, quite introverted, but she's really into art, and also struggles with the feeling that she comes up short compared to her 2 friends, and that is explored throughout the series. Magda, who is known as the boy crazy one, the one who loves to flirt. Nadine, who's kind of the goth of the group, both of whom Ellie just sees as being so effortlessly glamorous, where she feels kind of frumpy and boring in comparison. And they go through many of the different trials and anxieties of being a teenager, particularly of being a teenage girl, from struggling at school, anxieties about entering your first relationships, and particularly the competitive element among your friends, image insecurities, particularly in Girls Under Pressure, which sees Ellie developing an eating disorder. And I feel like for a lot of young women, myself included, this was the first time a lot of these issues were being addressed in the literature that we read. So it's a pretty beloved series. So you can imagine there was a lot of millennial screaming going on when we found out that Jacqueline Wilson was revisiting Ellie, Magda and Nadine 25 years later through her very first adult novel, Think Again, seeing Ellie and her friends navigating the trials and tribulations of adulthood. Once again, we are back in Ellie's perspective 25 years on. Ellie is now a single mother to her university-aged daughter Charlotte and living in a small London flat. We meet her the morning of her 40th birthday, which sees Ellie feeling pretty stuck. Life is not quite going as she'd planned, feeling like she is lacking meaning and excitement and a sense of purpose in her life. Her career has stagnated, her love life is non-existent, her friends all seem to be drifting away, moving on with their lives while she's feeling pretty irrelevant. And we follow her on throughout the course of the book. I feel like for readers who grew up with the Girls series, it's quite nostalgic to get back into this world and to meet these characters again as adults, particularly if you yourself ever related to Ellie, feeling like you are the awkward one of the friendship group. I really related to Ellie as a teenager, particularly with how she thinks of herself in terms of body image issues, especially. You know, as somebody who has never been the pretty one in the group, the thin one in the group, growing up in the noughties, you know, that really resonated with me. And while I expected to see some of those same insecurities coming through in Think Again, I did find it a little bit disappointing to be back with Ellie and feeling like in a lot of ways she hasn't developed from her teenage self. And I found especially her voice within her point of view to be kind of muddled. She seems to oscillate from sounding like a 14-year-old again, with so many moments of teenage immaturity, to then be spouting phrases that sound more at home in the mouth of a 70-year-old than a 40-year-old. And that is kind of a big criticism that I have of Ellie in this book. I just couldn't help but feel that Jacqueline Wilson's portrayal of what it is to be a 40-year-old mum seems very outdated. Ellie just seems so awkwardly out of touch with technology and pop culture in a way that just did not feel realistic to a 40-year-old in 2024, with the people that Ellie surrounds herself with her location being in London. For example, for her 40th birthday, she is gifted an iPhone by her family, and it just seems so exaggeratedly foreign to her. She's just kind of there like, ooh, all these gadgets and gizmos. And I'm sorry, but I am almost 30. There is only 10 years removed from me and Ellie. There is only 5 years removed from my sister and Ellie. I just do not buy it. And when I did a bit of digging, I realised that actually the age difference between Ellie and her daughter Lottie is the same as Jacqueline Wilson and her daughter. Similarly, Jacqueline Wilson had her daughter at 22, which would have meant that her daughter would have been 18 as Jacqueline Wilson turned 40. So I feel like Jacqueline Wilson is potentially infusing a lot of herself into Ellie. And I know that a lot of parents, especially as their kids grow up, feel like they are a little bit out of touch and maybe a bit out of touch with pop culture, but I don't think it is to this extent in 2024. I think a 40-year-old in the 1990s is very different just due to the technology that we have than a 40-year-old in 2024. You cannot be this out of touch. And it just means that Ellie comes across a lot more inauthentic to the time that she is living. And speaking of Lottie, the relationship between Lottie and Ellie just seems so underwhelmingly underdeveloped. Ellie is raising Lottie as a single mother, and I just thought it was a shame to not get much of Lottie in this story. She just seems like a decorative figure rather than an actual character in her own right, which just feels like such a missed opportunity. I think if I were personally writing this book, the choice that I would have made would have been to age Lottie down just slightly and make it so that Lottie is last year of high school rather than first year of university, because I just think it would have given more emotional stakes to have Ellie having to deal with her upcoming bout of being an empty nester. We'd get the exploration of motherhood and what it means to let go, rather than meeting Ellie when she's already gone through that process. I don't know, I just feel like that would have been much more compelling and interesting. We've never seen Ellie as a mother before, and in this book we barely get to see it at all. I had big problems with the structure of this book because we spend spend a good third of the book just kind of revisiting old faces, going down memory lane. And while it's nice and nostalgic to get a look at all of these characters and kind of catch up with them, see where they are now, it means that the first third of the book just feels very meandering and plotless. So when around about a third to a half of the way through, it then does take a turn. You're expecting something significant, but unfortunately, the turn that it goes into is pretty underwhelming, just being about Ellie's romantic relationships. And I couldn't help but feel like I wanted something a bit more from this book. The romantic subplots are also another area where this book falters. Ellie has two love interests presented throughout this book, and both, once again, I found underwhelming. The one that we are meant to presume is the endgame is incredibly underwritten, and Ellie's interaction with this character are so minimal that you could almost make the argument that they're a figment of her imagination. On the other hand, we spend such a significant amount of the book with the other person, and you just know it's not going to last. They feel so shoehorned into the story, and it just drags down the plot. I just don't know how it serves the story to have so much of the emotional weight based around characters that we don't care about, and on relationships which don't resonate with readers from the get-go. I really don't want to be bashing this book, but I have another criticism, which is that longtime fans of the Girls series are probably going to be really disappointed in how little Nadine and Magda feature in this book. They are largely sidelined, they pop up in and out of this story, and while they pop in and out of the story, they don't seem to have very much to do. And so if you were expecting a triumphant return, a reunion between these characters, these three girls who we've grown up with loving, you're probably going to be pretty disappointed. A pet dislike I have from this book is that Jacqueline Wilson has a tendency to self-reference. For example, the fact that Ellie names her daughter based on the characters in her book The Lottie Project, or making a comment alluding to the illustrated mum when Ellie goes to get a tattoo. And I know opinions will vary on this, but I really kind of hate it when authors self-reference. I'm fine with pop culture references, but referencing yourself just seems a little bit tacky, jarring. They definitely take me out of the reading experience at the very least. The conclusion of this book does leave quite a lot of loose threads hanging, which I don't know Jacqueline Wilson's intentions. It may hint at the possibility of a sequel, but it just seemed a little bit odd to me to have all of these loose hanging threads, because even within series, I feel like Jacqueline Wilson wraps up her stories much neater and gives them a much more sense of closure. And if we're not returning to this series in another book, then it is just a bit jarring. So while I do think fans of the original Girls series will appreciate the nostalgia trip that this book offers, you know, you do get to meet a lot of your old favourite characters, and it is always interesting to see where they end up. I feel like this book just leans a little bit too heavily on that nostalgia to carry it through, rather than actually creating a compelling story in its own right. As I say, if I were to rewrite this, I would have spent a lot more time on Ellie and her family, aging down her daughter so that we could spend more time with their mother-daughter dynamic. I would get rid of one of her love interests entirely and bulk up the other, so that we actually know that this is a person who we need to root for. And I would simply give more for Nadine and Magda to do. They are a massive part of why people are coming back to this series, so make them more than hollow caricatures of themselves. So there we go, those are my slightly negative thoughts on Think Again by Jacqueline Wilson. I was really looking forward to this, and it was a little bit disappointing, but I know that probably isn't the opinion of everybody, so I'd be really keen to hear your thoughts on this, and I would love to hear from you in the comments below. I hope you're having a fantastic day. I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks. Bye.